Mhm.
This is passage 3. Okay, so now how do you currently do comparative passages? Like, do you read both passages at the same time, like, and before going to the
Straight through.
questions, or do you do one, look at the questions, then the second one?
I do it straight through. Is there another? Is there the? Is reading it and then look at the questions better?
So it depends on the person. Sometimes it'll make it a little bit easier, just because you're focusing in on just one at a time,
Mhm.
but it's personal preference.
Okay.
We can do it either way.
One at a time seems like it may work out best.
Yeah, and it's like it's always like another tool that you have in case you wanna try it out. Okay, so let me figure out where in the world my mouse went. I have like my monitor set up here, and I'm like, okay, so where and like, okay, there we go. Okay, whew. So we're seeing that this is one of our humanity passages, and they're talking about music. So we're already kind of thinking about, okay, if we look at our other humanities passage, we're seeing that's kind of like more of a social science and definitely very, very abstract. So that's like a clue that we're going to have a little more of or this is a little more concrete, I should say. So in this one, they're probably going to be a little more abstract, meaning there's going to be more explanations. It might be a little bit harder to grasp, but that's okay. We're just going to kind of like really remind ourselves if it's abstract, they're going to be definitions, they're going to set whole frameworks, but we really just want to focus in on like, what's the point?
Okay.
Just what's the point? Um, we're going to pay attention to our key players, key ideas as usual, and see what our author is thinking about. Um, so, passage A, music does not always gain by association with words. Like images, words can excite the deepest emotions, but are inadequate to express the emotions they excite. So they're talking about like words and emotions, adequate, like inadequate expression. So our author thinks that, you know, like there's like, we're looking at music and words can't get at everything.
Hmm.
And music sometimes does things that words can't do. Music is more adequate. So we're like, if we have to compare words and music, we can say that the author thinks that music is the better thing to express emotions,
Okay.
and hence will often seize an emotion that may have been excited by images or words, deepen its expression, and by doing, excite still deeper emotion. So basically, music can express a lot of things that words can't emotionally, and then like it can like impact that emotion. So I'm like, okay, cool. This author seems really, really on board with this, with emotions. That is how words can gain by being set to music. So that their very first sentence was music does not always gain by association words. Just because you put music and words together doesn't mean that it's always going to make music better,
Hmm.
but words can be made better by setting them to music. So it seems like, music is kind of getting like the short end of the stick here. The words are gaining a lot, music doesn't gain all the time.
Okay.
So they're just trying to like tease out like what's the relationship between words and music, and emotion too. It's all based on this emotion. How did this feel? I know it's quite a
It
few
felt,
ideas
it felt okay.
swirling
I
around.
mean, it's a lot going on, but I think as we go
Yeah.
on, it's gonna kind of streamline it a little bit.
Hmm. So they're kind of giving us our framework. Like here's these things individually, how they interact with emotions, and so now we're trying to figure out what is the point. What do they want to tell us? So they say, but to set words to music, as in an opera or a song. So they gave us an example there. So to set the words to music is in fact to mix two arts together. Okay. So it's not like music is independent of words. Like if you set them together, it transforms into whatever its art is.
Okay.
A striking effect may be produced, but at the expense of the purity of each art. So this is, just reinforcing what they said together. You're mixing the two together. Poetry is a great art, so is music. But as a medium for emotion, each is greater alone than in company. So that's interesting. So
Right.
we were saying before, music can express emotions better than words. But if you combine them together, apparently both of these things by themselves are greater than whatever that mix is. Although various good ends arise from linking the two. So it could be good still to mix art, like the two arts, music and song, or music and words. providing the words are subordinated to the more expressive medium of the music. So it can still be good art, provided that the words are subordinated to the more expressive medium of music. Basically, that the words are just following what the music is doing. The words aren't controlling it. Then they ask, what good can any words do for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? So they're trying to pull us into an example here. So too, an opera is largely independent of words and depends on its aesthetic value, not upon the poetry of the libretto, the words of the opera, or even the plot or scenery, but upon its emotional range. So they're saying, words are not going to be helpful in the symphony that Beethoven wrote, because it's all music. And they're saying if we look at operas, we don't judge it by like the words in the opera. We judge it by like the emotional range. And then they say it's a region dominated by the musical element. So basically, music puts the team on its back and gives a lot of this the value. So that paragraph 1 is giving us, pretty abstractly music, words, emotion, all this stuff. And then paragraph 2 talks about what happens when we link these things together. They say each one is better by itself than in company, but you could still have something that's a really powerful piece of art if you let the music take control and lead the words.
Okay.
How does this feel? I know I was like, huh?
But I think it feels okay.
Okay. Good. So at this point, we can go through the questions and just kind of start to think about like what are the questions that we can answer just based off of this passage. And we might not be able to wholly commit to one answer choice, but we'll get pretty close. So 15, it says the authors of both passages attempt to answer which of the following questions. So like for both passages, for this to be true, it has to get mentioned in A and B. So if we see anything that doesn't get mentioned, we can weed it out right away.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So so they're asking which one of the following questions. They're trying to answer it. So A, is music inherently a more expressive medium than poetry? Do we talk about that in A?
Is music inherently a more expressive medium than poetry? It says that music is more adequate and hence will often seize an emotion that will have excited by images or words. And by doing so excites the deep emotions how words can gain by set to music. In fact, two words and poetry is great art, so is music, but in medium for motion. So I think it's saying that even though when you mix the two of music and emotion, music and poetry is great. But I think they're saying that together, that alone is better alone.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it together. So
Right.
music inherently a more expressive medium than poetry. It doesn't really say poetry is more expressive than music. It just says, okay, poetry is great art, so is music. Each is greater alone than in company.
Well, I guess another way to rephrase it is is music better than poetry? Like does it express more? Do they draw that comparison?
They don't draw that music is better than poetry. I guess they're trying to do different. No, they're trying to do like tell us what's the difference between poetry and music, but they're basically saying that music is great for emotion.
Yeah.
But separately, they're greater separately.
Yeah. So they're just talking about how do they like what is great art? It's not necessarily talking about the expressiveness here in that paragraph. If we go back to paragraph 1, they talk about expressing, they say music is more adequate to express, but we don't know if we're talking about expressiveness,
Right.
Or inherently. And in the first paragraph, they're only talking about words, not poetry.
Right.
So there's quite a few things that make it inaccurate. And I think too, like you were kind of like, I don't know if it wasn't. And I think, it's like when you start to get confused, you're like, okay, you're trying to justify it.
Right. It
Like
doesn't
if
work.
we're working too hard, the answer is no. B is the emotive power of poetry enhanced when it is set to music.
Yes.
So we do talk about that, so we can keep it. C, should opera be accorded the same respect as other forms of classical music?
And about words and depends upon the poetry of the letter, or even a poetry story. But until upon its emotional range, a region dominated by the musical element. It doesn't say that.
Right. We don't really try to answer that question. D, how important are the words to the artistic effectiveness of opera? Do we talk about that?
Okay, so what's good about words should based off poetry offers are should come independent of words and depend on aesthetic value, not upon a poetry. It's very important.
So we do answer that question. So we'll go ahead and keep that one. Then E, how is opera different from all other musical art forms? Do we answer that question in A? We
Mm-mm.
don't. So just like that, once we read like passage B, we just have to pick between two answers.
Right.
So like that's like the benefit of reading it this way is that we're just focusing in on passage A, and that can be much more manageable for folks. Because I imagine some of these, C and E or A, like some of these will like if we were to read them all at the same time and then answer the questions, we might get like really tripped up and not as strict about eliminating them. But here we're like, okay, we could be super picky.
That's good.
um, all right, so we have 16. Which one of the following issues is addressed by the author of passage A, but not by passage B? So we're basically looking and seeing like what we can keep answers that are addressed. If they don't get addressed by A, we eliminate them.
Right. The importance of music to aesthetic judgment of an operatic work. I don't think if they're saying the aesthetics, the judgment. I don't think there's a judgment of an operatic work.
Yeah,
It,
this one's a little weird because I mean they do mention like they do kind of have like they do talk about like aesthetic judgment in a little bit. They're kind of talking about like, okay, what makes something like a greater art. So I guess you could count that as an aesthetic judgment, but they aren't really trying to harp on like the importance of music necessarily. They do say like music is going to make something like they say that it could be a good art if you let the music lead the work in an
right.
opera rather than leading it with um words. So that is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
um
I don't
hmm,
that answer. 'Cause is aesthetic value and aesthetic judgment the same?
that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm not sure. I'm not liking it. I probably would eliminate that for like aesthetic judgment. I think
Yeah.
you bring up a really good point. And I think any, now that I
But
read that again, any is going to be, a bit of a strong choice here. B, how music is affected when it is combined with words.
yes.
Yeah, we definitely talk about that, so we can keep it. C, the ability of music to evoke an emotional response in the listener.
We haven't really talked about the listener too much.
But did we talk about the listener at all?
No.
Because you said too much.
No, not at all.
So that's tricky because we're thinking listener, but like the listener is kind of like this like silent character in
Okay.
A. So like this first passage is, we're thinking, okay, emotions that they excite. Words can excite the deepest emotions.
Oh, who is that?
Um, so theoretically, there is a listener, and you're so right. We didn't mention a listener at all. But if it can excite emotion, we're thinking, okay, music is more adequate. It seizes an emotion in whom? It's listener.
Oh, and a listener. Okay.
So like this is where we're gonna just kind of like, and I think this is probably I'm gonna just kind of take a wild guess. I would not be surprised if this was the answer and they hope people eliminate it because of the listener, like, and they don't see it directly in the passage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, D, whether music should ever be subordinated to words with which it is combined.
Um, were the words to be subordinated? What's the word? Which is it? When it says subordinated,
Mm-hmm.
be subordinated. Do we talk about words being? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where that word comes up with.
The two providing that words are subordinate to more expressive medium music. But as medium for emotion, each is greater alone than a company, although various good ends rise from linking the two, providing the words are subordinated to the more expressive medium of music. Um, is subordinated just combined?
Or subjected. So they do mention combining them here. And so what they're getting at is like when you combine them, which one takes the lead? So like combining is important because that's what they already said. But it's like, which one is like which one is setting the tone? So like in opera, the music is leading it. The words are kind of in there. If it was like I don't know, I'm trying to think about like a way in which like I think musical theater, a lot of musical theater is like driven by the words and they kind of create the music to follow the story the words have. So it's like basically they're saying like which one is going to be like in charge. Um,
Okay, then
so in this passage, they're saying words are subordinated to the more expressive medium of music. So they're saying like the art can be okay if you combine them if the music takes the lead. What Dia is saying is, is there ever a case where the music is going to, like, the words are going to take the lead of the music?
oh no, that's not what it's saying.
Yeah. So they're hoping you see the word subordinated and you pick it because you're like, like that looks good. But
Right.
we don't actually talk about when words should be more important or music should be less important.
But
Then E, whether music should be judged in isolation from the libretto in opera.
author large dependent upon words and depends on aesthetic value, not upon the poetry of the bottle or even the plot of a scenery, but upon its emotional range. A region dominated by the musical element, which we judge in isolation from the bottle. It doesn't say that music should be isolated.
Right.
The music should be judged separately from the vibrato. It's just telling us um that the opera um that the opera depends on words and it
Right.
depends on
Right.
aesthetic, but it doesn't say that.
Yeah. So this clues us in that they might talk about a libretto in the second passage. But we're like, yeah, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about whether it should be judged in isolation. And the thing about D and E should ever be or should be judged, we would know if our author held that opinion. We
Okay.
would know if they were making a recommendation, but they're not here. Very nice. So we're down to 2. It makes our job a little easier.
Right.
17, passage B, but not passage A, includes which of the following topics in its discussion of opera? So now we're thinking our right answer is going to have something that we don't talk about in A. So if we see anything we did talk about, we're going to go ahead and eliminate it.
Okay. The importance of plots and scenery to the opera's aesthetic value. We didn't. Okay. Or even
Yeah, so that can stay.
plot or scenery. Okay. So we just talk about the plot or scenery.
Mm-hmm. What about B? The ability of images and words to excite deep emotion.
I thought I saw something that said deepen its expression, and by doing so, still deeper in emotion. The ability of images and words. This is not always game. Like images, words can excite the deepest emotions. It doesn't say. It says images and words.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does say that.
Yeah, so like that whole piece right there, they directly, like, that's a direct line reference right there.
The consequences of combining poetry and music in a single art form. what were the consequences? It just said that combining music and art together,
What
um,
happens?
that it can happen, but it doesn't say that, and it said that they'll be good by themselves, but it doesn't say what the consequences would be.
Hmm. That's interesting. And I think you could make an argument. They say like each is greater alone. Um, and then they say, although various good ends arise from linking the two. So that's a consequence. You know,
Uh,
there can be good consequences. And consequence, like I don't think we naturally read it as good or bad.
right. I think
But you know, like
that.
it's kind of iffy. If we weren't sure, we could definitely leave it. But I think like that is enough to probably eliminate it.
Okay.
But you know, there's no harm in keeping it at this point because we know it has to be mentioned about passage B or mentioned in passage B for us to take it. What about D, the relative roles of music and libretto in opera?
The relative role of music and libretto in opera. We do talk about the libretto in opera. The roles we don't, but we what we don't talk about is the roles of music.
Mm-hmm. So this one's a little like, you know, reading between the lines here. So, you know, they're saying in the second paragraph, you know, it can be okay to link the two. It's not as valuable, it's not as good art, but it might be okay art if the music takes the control. And
Oh,
then they say, you know, opera is largely independent of words and depends for its aesthetic value not upon poetry. So basically, libretto is not that important, or even plot or scenery. They're not really as important, um, but it depends on its emotional range. So they do talk about the relative roles. They're saying music is relatively more important. And if we look at that line, they actually, importance of plot and scenery to an opera's aesthetic value, they actually go ahead and discuss that in
but-
that line that we just
oh,
read. They said
right,
there's no
music,
importance.
right,
So we
that,
caught that.
right.
Um, what about E, the differences among different types of opera?
No.
So we definitely don't do that. So this is a case where like I probably would pick E and flag it at this point because I think we could make an argument that they did talk about the consequences of combining poetry and music.
Okay.
The test is going to be, is it mentioned in passage B? Um, but we know we're so confident that this is not mentioned in passage A. Nice.
Hmm.
So, like 3 questions, we got 2 different answers to choose between. It makes it go
Right.
really quickly, and it means that we can read through B a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
18, it can be inferred the author of passage B has which of the following opinions of opera in which the words are subordinated to the music.
It's
So,
a
this is an author question.
it's primarily a popular art form. It doesn't say anything about its popularity.
Good.
It has been criticized for betraying opera's main objectives. Mm,
Oh, wait, passage B. Oops, we shouldn't be answering this
oh,
right now. But this is good. I guess if we wanted to quiz ourselves. So we just kind of skipped it. Sorry, I like totally skipped B. I thought it said A.
I thought it said too. Okay, next one.
um, and that is like a drawback. You have to like read really carefully. Like, okay, does it talk about passage A or passage B? So 19. Which one of the following is a principle that is implicit in the argument made by the author of passage B? So we don't really know what that part is, but it's a principle that would be most likely rejected by the author of passage A. So we're thinking if our author has nothing to say on the topic, or if our author would agree, we would go ahead and, you know, eliminate that question.
Okay. An opera's non-musical element are essential to the opera's aesthetic value. No, we would know that words are important for the opera's aesthetic value.
So you said words are important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's think about it. So like an opera, we talk about the opera in the second paragraph. So like an opera is largely independent of words, and it's depends for its aesthetic value not upon the poetry, the words of the opera, or even the plot or scenery. So all these things, but the music, like that's emotional range, the music. So they would disagree with this idea.
Non-musical. It's the musical.
Yeah. So they're
Okay.
saying the non-musical elements, the words, libretto, plot, scenery, they're not important. But the music is important.
Right.
So
I thought
here, like,
it
this
was
is like really nice. It's really, really nice.
Mhm.
B, even in operas where there is relative parity, so like equivalence, among the various elements, the music is the most important element.
Right here it doesn't say the music is the most important element.
Yeah. So like, our author is saying that the aesthetic value depends on the music. So the author is more likely to agree with this because ultimately they're saying music is the most important.
Yeah.
So that's we can go ahead and eliminate that because they would agree with that. C, an opera cannot be artistically successful unless it skillfully balances many factors. Would our author agree, disagree, or abstain?
Many factors. Okay, so some things that make the opera depends, not the poetry, not the vibrato, or but upon its emotions. But it's not many factors. We're saying it depends on the emotional range. It depends on a factor.
Yeah, there's basically like one thing that makes it artistically successful. So, we don't know if our author would agree or disagree because, they don't really talk about multiple factors. Um,
Mm,
Maybe they would disagree because it says cannot. And I think our author would say, look, okay, it could be successful if you have good music.
right.
So might leave it. We'll see what the author of passage B thinks. um, D, in order for an opera to be artistically successful, the music should not be subordinated to other features of the opera.
Now, if our opera is successful, we should not be exposed to other features of the opera. It doesn't say what's going to make the opera successful.
Yeah, to be artistically successful. So this is going back to this idea of like the music. The aesthetic value is all about the music. And so they say if music subordinates the words, it could end up being a successful piece. So this would be something that our author would actually agree with, probably.
Right.
Um, and then E, an opera's libretto has formal features that can be analyzed independently of the opera's music.
Oh, we haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah, so we haven't really talked about it, so we can't reject it outright. So that's like a key that we can just go ahead and eliminate it.
Mm-hmm.
So now, we're down to A and C. And so like this one, we know for sure the author is going to reject that. This one, it's like it's kind of vague. The word factors, many factors, like, hmm,
What's up with
we'll
that?
see. We'll see in passage B. But if we had to pick a choice, like right now, like let's say we were in a time crunch, we're probably going to pick the one that we're feeling a lot like absolutely know that this is going to be rejected. In the case that we read B and in both of them, like the author agrees with both, we're probably going to just pick A because we can absolutely guarantee that the author is rejecting A for sure.
Okay.
With C, it's kind of like we don't know. 20, the author of passage B defines a singer's opera. So this is a passage B question. So we know to pay attention for that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I might actually flag this one. And then what's the other one about passage B? Cool. And then 21, the author of passage A would be most likely to regard the discussion in passage B about a third kind of opera as evidence of what? So we're going to wait and hold this question until we read passage B. And
Okay.
so it's good that they put it at the end because this one is probably going to take a little more brain power for us. That's
Oh,
okay. All right. So we're in a really nice spot because at this point we've got, most questions we've got, one or two to pick from. And
mhm.
even with those, like we kind of have a lead on which one we like better. And then we've got two questions that are just about B. One is about words subordinating to music in opera. So we're going to pay attention to what are the words, and how like what are their relationship with music. What does the author think if you subordinate the words to the music? And then we're also going to think about what's the singer's opera. So we're going to pay attention to those two phrases, but we're going to just read it like we would any other thing.
Right.
Okay. So passage B. Throughout the history of opera, two fundamental types may be distinguished. So that's their key. Their key idea right there. That in which music is primary, and that in which there is essentially parity between music and other factors. This is where that phrase comes from.
Oh, yeah, we did see
So
that.
either music is better than everything else, or it's equal to everything else.
Okay.
The former, sometimes called the singer's opera, so there's that keyword from the question, a term which has earned undeserved contempt. So, it seems like it's not a really great term, but the author thinks that, it's not that bad. So the singer's opera, where the music is primary, is exemplified by most Italian operas, while the latter, exemplified by the operas of German composer Richard Wagner, depend for their effect on a balance among many factors, of which the music is only one, albeit the most important. So they're saying, the singer's opera, the music is primary. It seems like people don't like this term, but the author doesn't think it's that bad of a term. And there's a lot of Italian operas. Then you have this other set of operas where a lot of the German people, or the German composer Wagner, has a lot of these like different factors going on, and there's relative parity. So we could even start to answer this question already. So the author of passage B defines a singer's opera as an opera in which there is relative parity between the music and other elements.
Yes.
So not quite. So we know that they're talking about parity between the elements. That's the second type of opera,
Oh,
the German one. So we want to be really careful there. B, in which the drama is of paramount importance. What do we think of that one?
Required to establish opera on a regular basis. I don't think that's the right one.
Yeah, we don't talk about drama. We know the music is primary here. So if paramount importance means the most important, no, music would be in paramount importance. C, that is generally of lower artistic merit. Now, do we think that the author would say that it's of lower artistic merit?
No.
Right. We're not talking about that here because we're like, okay, they all the author has said about this question is that like it has undeserved contempt for that phrase. D, from the art form's earliest historical period. Is that what a singer's opera is?
From the art form's earliest historic period? I don't know if that's the earliest historic period.
Right. We don't really talk about that. They're hoping we get confused when it says the latter. The latter just means that it's the second thing mentioned. So the second thing or the latter would be this second opera. Doesn't have anything to do with history. So it leaves us with E. So a singer's opera is an opera in which non-musical elements are subordinate.
Yes.
Because it means that everything that's not musical is less important, and that's exactly what's going on because music is primary. So they're really trying to test, can we just sort through all that information?
Exactly.
We feel pretty good about that answer.
Yeah.
So, we've got two types of opera so far in passage B. The singer's opera, music is first. Then this other opera. Music and other factors are kind of equal, even though music is like a little more important. And then they say, theoretically, it would seem that there should be a third kind of opera. And this is another question that we've got, in which the music is subordinated to the other features. So this is different. We're making the music, subordinate to everything else. And so, we're not really getting this yet. Words being subordinated to music. We're subordinating music here. So not quite the same question. We'll kind of pay attention to it. But basically there's music is most important, music is equal to things, but like a little more important. Then there's like a third type of opera in theory where music is the least important compared to the other features. While the earliest operas were of this kind, their appeal was limited. and a fuller participation of music was required to establish opera on a secure basis. So basically, this third type of opera, the earliest operas had music as the least important. But yeah, people didn't like them very much. They really had to, kind of change how they were doing it and give music more value in order for the opera to like take footing. So all of this first paragraph is just talking about the three different types of operas.
Okay.
Okie dokie. Paragraph 2. In any event, in any aesthetic judgment of opera, regardless of the opera's type, neither the music nor the poetry of the libretto should be judged in isolation. So, like our first author. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, was it saying it just can't be judged by itself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, they're saying, you shouldn't look at anything by itself. Look at them together in any aesthetic judgment. So this is where that phrase came in. So the music is good, not if it would make a good concert piece, but it's good if it serves the particular situation in the opera in which it occurs, contributing something not supplied by the other elements. So if we pull up author A in here, they would say, okay, well, clearly it's got to be contributing like the emotional expression. That's what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. So they would be aligned in that way. Similarly, the poetry is good, not because it reads well by itself, but primarily if, while embodying a sound dramatic idea, it furnishes opportunity for effective musical and scenic treatment. So basically, it's only as good as it enhances the other parts of this opera. True, the elements of music and poetry may be considered separately, but it's like, okay, you could. Our author doesn't think you should, but you could. But only for purposes of analyzing their formal features. In actuality, these elements are as united as hydrogen and oxygen are united in water. This is really random. They're just pulling in this random thing. They never do this. So we might just get we might have to think about the purpose of that a little more. It is this union, further enriched and clarified by the visual action, that results in opera's inimitable character. So basically, they're saying, you got to put them together or else you're just not going to get the point. You're not going to understand how they work. Like you can look at them independently for structure, but you really should judge their aesthetic, artistic judgment, merit, whatever, together. How are you feeling?
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It is quite boring. And it's been a long day.
I was trying to hold on. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And we're going to knock this out. You're going to see how quick this is because now we've got, most of them have 2 questions or 2 answer choices.
Elements are united. Okay. So it's saying that it is important because they work well together.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we should be evaluating them together, not separately. So the authors of both questions attempt to answer which one of the following questions. So do we talk about how the emotive power of poetry is enhanced when it's combined with music in this passage?
Poetry should be judged in isolation. When it's set to music, the music is a more important enhancement of music, not good. When I'm a good criticize a particular situation. Should be something supplied. We do talk about how emotions and the power of poetry enhance when it's set to music.
And where is that?
The music is good, not it would make a good concert, but it serves the particular situation opera when it occurs, contributing something not supplied by other elements. Wait, in the event aesthetic judgment of opera regards of neither the music nor the poetry. Oh, should be judged in isolation. The music good, it would make a good concert piece. Some of the poetry is good not because it reads well by itself, but primarily it's embodying a sound. Oh, it doesn't say that.
Yeah. So here, if it doesn't talk about it, we eliminate it. But, we made the connection, the author passage A would say, okay, passage B, you're talking about emotions, but we don't actually talk about emotions here directly. Okay. So we would go with D. So how important are words to the artistic effectiveness of opera?
Okay.
our author says, everything is important. You got to consider them together with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
All right, 16. Which one of the following issues is addressed by the author passage A? So we did that part, but not by the author passage B. So we're thinking between B and C, what is not talked about?
Effective symbolic words, the ability of music to evoke an emotional response to the listener. Which of the following is issues addressed by the author passage A, but not the author in passage B? Music is different from how much expected about words. We do talk about how music is affected with the when it's combined it with words.
Right, right. So that leaves us with C. And
Yes.
another way, we just said we're not talking about emotion here. They don't mention emotion in B too. So
Right.
like this, it's like when you're feeling tired, especially when you get to passage 3 and 4, you're gonna be feeling tired. But like this, like it helps you, like it
Right.
kind of gives you like a second wind on the back end because you're
Right.
just choosing between a couple. 17, passage B, but not passage A, includes which of the following topics in its discussion of opera. So now we're seeing what do we mention from passage B between C and E.
The consequence of combined poetry music into a single art form. United. Oh, C.
So the consequences of combining poetry and music. What are the
Oh
consequences
no,
in B?
because we had consequences in this one as well, in A as well. Because you had said, I think you said in A when I was saying what's the consequences.
Yeah,
I
there's something that we could argue about, like consequences here.
no good and arise from linking the two.
Mm-hmm. So like combining poetry and music in a single art form, they're basically like, this is how you should evaluate it. It doesn't necessarily get into consequences in B too much because they, they have like the different kind of operas. So I guess you could argue that they're consequences, like the
But
consequences that there's different types of
but in
operas.
B we only talked about the different kind of operas in B, not in A.
Yeah.
It'd be E.
Yeah. So there's like a lot of murkiness over with C, but E is a much clearer cut answer. So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to that, like we're just gonna go with the one we know that we feel really, really good about. But this one is probably a question that got a lot of people for sure. So 18, it's about passage B. So it can be inferred the author of passage B has which of the following opinions of opera in which the words are subordinated to music. So if we think about what's going on in the first paragraph, we see words are subordinated to the music. That might be talking. So there's like 3 different types. There's music as primary. So music subordinates everything else.
Mm-hmm.
We have the second type where music is the same as everything else. And then there's the third where music is subordinated, but we don't really talk about that one. So we're probably going to be going with that first type of music, that music is primary. So what do we know about that? And this is like the singer's opera question. So they asked us 2 questions about the singer's opera, which is kind of funny. So what do we know here?
Art music. Music is primary. It's supported to music. We know that music can be primary. Music is a primary art form.
Is it a primarily popular art form?
It's primary, but it does not say popular art form. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's primary.
Yeah, yeah. And so here we have to be careful because it's like primarily a popular art form. We can take primarily out. They can say it's a mostly popular art form. That's what they want us to say. They mentioned like that the third kind of opera is not popular,
Mm-hmm.
but they're hoping that you say, oh, if that's not popular, then the other ones are popular. That's not necessarily the case. Maybe nobody likes any opera whatsoever. B, it has been justly criticized for by betraying the opera's main objectives. Is that true?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, we would have read that. We definitely would have read it. C, it is emotionally more expressive than the other types of opera.
Seems access undesirable consent. Third, the appeal was limited. I don't see where it says it's more expressive.
Right. We don't talk about expressive. And here's this theme. They keep trying to trick us because we didn't talk about emotions
Oh,
in this
yeah.
paragraph. That was all an A. D, it is as legitimate as other types of opera.
The event is author. It says that a term which earned undeserved contempt is exemplified by Italian operas. It's legitimate. It said there was some undeserving contempt.
Yeah. Yeah. So some people don't seem to like singers' operas, but the fact that the author describes it as undeserved, well, the author thinks that this is just as like it's just as good as any other kind of opera.
Yeah.
That one looks really nice.
Mhm.
Then E, it should be judged as though it were a concert piece.
It didn't say anything about it being a concert piece.
Right. So like that was like real smooth sailing. Now we get two more questions. So 19, which one of the following is a principle that is implicit in the argument made by the author of passage B? So basically it's included in passage B's argument. And then we already know it's going to be rejected by author of passage A. And we felt really good about A being rejected. C, we're like, we don't know. So it really comes down to, what is the author, like what is part of the author's argument in B?
Opera's non-musical elements are essential to the opera's aesthetic value. But opera cannot be successful without its skillfully balances many factors. I think it can't be successful if it doesn't balance out many factors. But what would be the factors? Okay. Neither the music is good if it would make good concert piece, but it's other particular two fundamentals by the art with the following is implicit made by author of the passage B, but not be rejected in A. Okay.
So like another way to think about it is what would B agree with?
Non-music elements are essential to the operas. Okay, so visually distinguished music is primary and essential parts of music. Other factors. Performing sometimes close. Okay, so B is saying there are other factors. A is saying it's not really other factors. A is saying A just gets on emotions and how emotions and words and poetry all kind of go together. And sometimes they work better apart.
Mm-hmm.
This is skillfully balances many factors. Offers non-emotional elements are essential to the non-musical. What would be the non-musical elements? Third, music is primary. Other factors. I don't know. Now I'm still back with C.
So let's think about this. So we know you know, passage A thinks that the music is the most important. The everything else is like, it's only important if it helps like with the
Yeah.
music. But they wouldn't say that the non-music elements are essential. With C, could not be successful unless it skillfully balances many factors. Like A really only cares about the music. So strong disagreement to A, mild disagreement maybe to C. The author of passage B is saying you need to look at everything together. So when they come up with their types of operas, there's like, okay, music is primary, but you still have everything else that's digging in. You have to look at everything together. There's the other kind where music is just as important. So, then they spend time in paragraph 2 saying you need to like look at everything. You can't just throw one out or the other. You have to do everything together. So I think B would strongly agree with that
Yeah.
because they're saying like you can't just look at music in a vacuum. You have
Right.
to take into account the set, the words, everything else. With C, so if we're thinking about B, so B, you know, we don't really know if it talks about like artistic success unless
Oh,
like there's some
artistic
strong
success.
words.
Okay, I didn't even think about the artistic success part.
Yeah. Because if we're thinking about it, like they say in any event, in any aesthetic judgment of opera, neither music nor poetry should be judged in isolation. So like
Okay.
that's all they say about like artistic judgment, and that's the closest we can get to artistic success, but we don't know. B doesn't really like that's not included in the argument. They
Mhm.
actually don't even talk about it. So we can go ahead and eliminate C because we just don't talk about it in that argument. Whereas like we're looking for something that's implicit in the argument, meaning the B is going to like mention it and agree with part of it.
Okay.
That's a hard question. And we have 21. So the author of passage A would be most likely to regard the discussion in passage B about this third kind of opera. So the one where this third kind of opera that's highlighted. So where we have music subordinate to everything else. How would A feel about it? And what would they say is it's evidence of what? So
The early operas were one of a kind. Their appeal is limited, and the full participation of music was required to establish opera on a secure basis. Um, the author of passage A would most likely to regard the discussion in passage B regarding a third kind of opera as evidence of which of the following propositions: both poetry and music are diminished by being joined in one art form. No, they didn't say that. They said they're greater. They
we're
could be.
thinking about what A is saying. So
Oh,
A, we know that like A said both of them get worse, but it's salvageable if the music is taking the lead. Remember, that's paragraph 2 in A. So, A, this could be the answer. We probably want to look at our other answer choices and see what else there is to pick from.
okay.
Um, but it's not bad because we know like this is possible. Um, both are each is greater alone than in company. I actually don't know if it would say it's diminished,
Right. That was
but
the diminished part I wasn't sure about.
yeah. So we'll hold on to it. If it's the best answer, then we'll pick it. If it's not, then it's okay.
Okay.
B, the aesthetic value of an opera depends largely on the quality of its music.
The aesthetic value of an opera divides depends on quality of music, but upon its emotional range, dominated by the musical element. Regard the discussion of the various good roles and looking to expressive words and the plots, unified, but upon its emotional range, a region dominated by musical element. It doesn't say quality of music, but it does say a musical element. Is musical
So,
element and quality?
so what aesthetic value, quality, those are like pretty synonymous here. So it's
Okay.
saying like, the basically what makes an opera good depends on its music. Does it actually get into the deepest emotions here? This is a really interesting question because it's asking like this fact that there's a third kind of opera evidence like she gives evidence for what um we know this third kind of opera, it wasn't very popular because it subjected the music to other features, and then they realized, oh, we don't like this. We want more music. We want music to take more hold. So the
Oh,
author of Passage A would probably say, haha, it's because music is the most important thing. You can't leave out the music, guys.
mhm.
So, this seems like a pretty reasonable answer,
Yeah.
that it's showing how much the music matters. If you think about A, this isn't necessarily evidence that poetry and music are being like ruined.
Not by joining in one art form.
Yeah. Although, because, being joined in one art form, then we'd have the question of why is the German opera by Richard Wagner, like, why are those okay? Um, so B is seeming like a good answer.
Mhm.
C, the musical and non-musical elements of opera are indivisible from one another,
I don't think it says that.
right? D, music invariably gains by being combined with poetry.
It didn't say that music gains.
Yeah, because this would be an example of where, the whole work was still trash. Nobody liked it.
Mhm.
And so it was being subordinated, meaning it was combined, but it didn't gain in that case.
Mhm.
E, opera requires the careful balancing of many competing but equal elements.
Oh, it's definitely B.
So how did you get, what made it definitely?
Study that opera depends largely on the quality of music. We already know that music in B is important to how do we decipher the piece?
Mm-hmm. That key like depends largely. Whereas
Right.
in E, the difference between B and E is like whether you see them as equal or whether
Equal.
it depends largely on music. So
Right.
that's
Depend
really
on
good. Look at that.
start even
You
in my
get
let's look at God. He-
it. Looking at it.